Hello, everybody. Welcome. Very excited to have you here today. My name is Shiri Orion. I am the Executive Director of the American Friends of the Parent Circle. I see that the numbers are growing, so we'll just give people a minute to log on. We have had a fantastic reception for today's webinar. Nearly 500 people have registered. I hope that many of them will be with us today, and thank you everybody for joining us. We hope that everyone is safe and healthy and hanging in there with your spirits up. Today's webinar is also about hope, and hope is something that we all need right now. So I'm going to get started again. Again, my name is Shiri. I'm the Executive Director of the American Friends of the Parent Circle. For those of you who are new to the Parent Circle, we are an organization made up of 600 bereaved Israeli and Palestinian families, all lost a loved one to the conflict, and have decided to take the unique choice of reconciliation rather than revenge. We operate out of Israel and Palestine in the West Bank. We have education activities for Israelis and Palestinians together when possible. Unfortunately, now our activities are frozen on the ground. And I'm very excited to have with us today Colum McCann, Rami and Elhanan, and Bassam Aramin. All of these are great friends, and going to share with you today their experiences with the novel Apeirogon, which I hope everyone has either started to read, finished reading, or about to read. Just a little background information about what you can expect today. We have an hour together. We'll have Colum will be speaking for the majority of the time, and then Rami and Bassam, who are the co-directors of the Parent Circle. Rami is in Jerusalem and Bassam is in Jericho. They will join us at the end. We will have more time with Rami and Bassam on April 16th, where they will speak for the majority of time, and then Colum will join at the end. So mark your calendars now for April 16th. We'll have time at the end for questions. We can't take live questions, but if you look down at the bottom of your screen, there's a little icon that says Q&A, and you can type your questions in there and we'll do our best to get them. We've already received lots of questions by email. If you can't type in the Q&A, you can send us an email with your question, info@parentcirclefriends.org. This webinar will be recorded. We will send out the recording in case you want to share it. And please follow us on social media at the links that Christopher has provided in the chat box. So Colum, we're so excited to have you with us here today. Colum, just a little background on Colum. I'm sure you all know him. He is the author of 7 novels and 3 collections of stories, born and raised in Dublin, Ireland. He has been the recipient of many international honors, including the National Book Award. In 2017, he was elected to the American Academy of Arts. His work's been published in over 40 languages, and he's the co-founder of the nonprofit Global Story Exchange organization Narrative 4, and he teaches at the MFA program in Hunter College. But most importantly, Colum is our friend. Colum has become a great, great friend of ours and the Parent Circle. And he's written this extraordinary book called Apeirogon. I did not know that word before the novel came out, and I'm assuming many of you did not know what that word meant either. Now I know. Not only is Apeirogon a novel about Rami and Bassam, who are co-directors, and their daughters who they lost. Rami lost his daughter Smadar, Bassam lost his daughter Abir. But Apeirogon is also a polygon with a countably infinite number of sides. Yes, did I get that right? Okay, thank you. But for Parent Circle, that word is also taken on a much deeper meaning. Colum, Apeirogon has become the widest stage, the loudest megaphone that we have had until today to really broadcast our messages and share the messages of hope and reconciliation with the entire world. So thank you for that wonderful gift. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, and hopefully you can start from the beginning, right? Like, let's start at the beginning. Someone wrote about Apeirogon, that Apeirogon is a book that you feel, not read. And I really loved that sort of sentence, because a lot of the work that we do also is about feeling and not literal work. So take us from the beginning and tell us how this book was born and how it was felt and not read necessarily.
Well, thank you so much. And I got to say, it's an incredible honor to be here with my friends, Rami and Bassam. I can't wait until they speak later on. They are my brothers. They're my heroes. I think of them as important figures in the history of the world, not just in the past few years, but in what it is still to come. I was honored to be allowed to tell their story. I know we have almost 500 people, or close to 500 people, coming on board today, and they're from all over the world. And it's such an honor to be able to speak to this story, which is a story of hope in the face of all available evidence. And it seems to me these days, Sherry, that everybody is looking for some form of hope in the face of all the available evidence, the stuff that's going on around us. And I want to tell you first how I sort of came upon the story of Rami and Bassam. I was traveling with my nonprofit group, Narrative 4, which is a global story exchange organization that brings kids together from all over the world to tell one another's stories. I was also traveling with another nonprofit group called Tell Us, which is run by my friend Greg Khalil, who brings teams of peacemakers together to travel all over the world, but primarily in Israel and Palestine, to sort of nuance things up and give people access to all sorts of different sides. This is not a two-sided thing, but it is a polygonal thing, as you say. I stumbled across the word Apeirogon. I didn't know what the word Apeirogon meant either. I stumbled across it while writing about Northern Ireland, and realizing that in Northern Ireland, it wasn't just one side. There were so many different sides. This was in a book called Transatlantic. Fortunately, I sort of tucked that word Apeirogon into my back pocket. And I will tell you about the day when I actually remembered it. It was after about 10 days of travel through Israel and Palestine, meeting all sorts of people, meeting Israeli novelists, Palestinian rap stars, people who had been involved in breaking the silence, people who had been living in settlements, security experts, all sorts of people from many, many, many different angles. We'd been to Hebron, we'd been to Tel Aviv, we'd gone in many places, and my heart was sort of torn open by all these people, and my head was sort of like, the way I describe it was a bit of a head wrecker. But I thought I had it. I thought I knew what was going on, and I sort of held myself together. It was a 14-day trip, and the second to last day, it was a November afternoon. It was rainy. It was dark. It was about like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Our little bus with 12 people pulled into the town of Beit Jala, which is, many people know, it's just outside Jerusalem, right next door to Bethlehem. And we walked into this building and up this little flight of stairs, and I could smell the coffee and I could smell the cigarette smoke, and walked into this office, and these two men were sitting there, and they were, to me, ordinary men who were soon, in my eyes, about to become the most extraordinary men I've probably ever met in my life. One introduced himself as Bassam, the other introduced himself as Rami. I sat at a table. There were all these green napkins in the center of the table. They served us coffee, and I felt so welcome, and I sat down, and then they began to tell their stories. And I'm not ashamed to tell you that within a very short amount of time, I had broken. Not only was my sort of rib cage sort of yanked open, but my heart was turned backwards and forwards as they told their stories about how they had lost their daughters Smadar and Abir. And it just touched so much in me, so much. I felt like it was one of those moments where you know you're in a moment and you don't know how you're ever going to make sense of it. And I cried my fool eyes out. And they were so nice to me afterwards. Then they put their arms around me, which they do with everyone, really. With even in Corona times, we can't put our arms around each other except virtually. But they still do. They do this virtually. But they put their arms around me, and they said to me, "Okay, why don't you go and harness the power of your grief?" And I thought, yeah, okay, that's I got it. I kind of understand. And I went away, and I was looking for a novel. I tried to write a different novel that was sort of set in Northern Ireland and the West Bank, and it failed spectacularly. It was it was something. And then a friend of mine said to me, she said, "Well, what was it about Israel and Palestine that really touched you?" And I said, "Well, it was Rami and Bassam, meeting Rami and Bassam." And she said to me, "Well, why don't you write about them?" And I was like, "Can I? Should I? Will I? Can I? How can I write?" I'm an Irishman who spent a lot of time in Northern Ireland. Yes, I know about the peace process in Northern Ireland and so on, but I live in New York, and how can I access these two extraordinary stories? What sort of feat of imagination? What sort of thing? How can I do it? And I started to think about it, and I started to investigate, and I investigated Beit Jala, for instance, and I saw that like Beit Jala was on this migratory route for birds, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So the whole of all these Irish birds and Swedish birds and South African birds and all these other birds from all over the world, they sort of congregate in over Jerusalem and Beit Jala. And then I began to think, well, surely we all congregate over Jerusalem and Beit Jala. Surely in certain ways, we're all tied. We all want to go to Jerusalem. We all want to go to that part of the world where three continents meet: Africa, Asia, Europe, where at least three major religions, claim birthplaces. There's so many of us are there. And then I started to think, well, then maybe so many of us are actually involved also in the story of Smadar and Abir. Maybe it's possible to tell or to create a story that's a compendium of human experience, but always returns back to this heartbreaking story that opened me in an extraordinary way. So I went to the guys. And they'll tell you more about this in a few minutes. They'll probably tell you more of the truth than I will. I went to the guys and I said to them, "Listen, Rami and Bassam, can I write about you?" And they said, "Yes, of course." And then I kind of said, "No, I'm not sure that you really understand what I'm saying. I'm a novelist. I'm also a journalist, and I love journalism, but I'm a novelist. I want to create a novel around your stories." And being the people that they are, and being that their message is the most important thing to them, their simple and incredibly convoluted message that we need to know one another, they said, whatever it is you want to do, they trusted me, and I trusted them. And I went away and spent the next 5 years working on this book, traveling back and forth to Israel and Palestine, sometimes with Narrative 4, 3 times with Narrative 4, once with PALFest, the Palestinian Literary Festival, once with the Irish government, once at the Jerusalem Book Fair, several times then on my own, sometimes just going and sitting in the center of Jerusalem and trying to imagine what it might have been on that awful day in 1997. Sometimes when Smadar was killed, sometimes going to Anata and going to the spot where, and it's very difficult for me even to say this in front of my friends, but where Abir had been killed, and trying to imagine what it was like. And then going to Rami, getting on his motorbike. He'll tell you more about the motorbike soon. Driving through Jerusalem on his motorbike. Going in the car with Bassam, walking through checkpoints with him, going to Jericho, sitting out under the Jericho stars at night, talking to him about the time first that he'd spent in prison, then when he got out of prison, then Combatants for Peace, and then what happened to Abir, and then him moving to Bradford, talking, investigating, and constantly trying to think how this relates to the world. They invited me into their homes. They let me meet their families. They told me things that they probably hadn't told a lot of people before. I am not embarrassed to say that I fell in love with them. I fell in love with them like brothers. And I wanted to protect their story, but I also know that their story is terribly, terribly, terribly difficult and terribly, terribly, terribly sad. And yet at the same time, it is also incredibly hopeful. Here are two people who say to the world that we should know each other above the ground, because if we do not know each other above the ground, we will have to get to know each other 6 feet below the ground. That sounds like a simple message. It is not a simple message. It is the most extraordinarily convoluted message, especially when you take the political situation into account. If you look at the different sides that are there, the weight of history, the weight of stories, the weight of storytelling, and yet the bravery of these men and their families, their wives, their kids, and the bravery of all the people who've been involved in the parents' circle, the 600 families who have somehow the courage to stand up and tell their story when their story is one of the hardest things that they have to carry all their lives. And I wanted to get into their heads. I wanted to get into their imaginations in different ways than just a journalist might do. And one of the things, Shiri, that I had to confront was my own confusion. Because guess what? I mean, it's embarrassing to say, but I didn't know all that much about Israel and Palestine until that moment when I went on that very first trip. I was confused. I went away. I have spent the last 5.5 years talking with people about Israel and Palestine, about history, about engagement, about ornithology, about weaponry, about politics, about tradition, about art, about all these things. And I have to tell you that I'm still confused. And I think confusion is okay. I think part of what's wrong with the world right now is that we're so afraid to say, I don't know. I'm confused. And so one of the ways that I structured the novel was to sort of try and deliberately confuse the reader. Now, I apologize to any of the readers out there, who got into the first 25 pages of the book and said, well, this is just nuts. Because it does appear to be a little bit nuts at first. It was deliberate. It goes from ornithology to weaponry, back to Abir, back to Smadar. It moves through area A, area B. And the thing that happened was my son, John Michael, became one of my strongest readers. And early on in the process, he said, Dad, can I read that book of yours, that crazy book that you're calling Apeirogon? And I said, yes, please. Coincidentally, my father used to be my reader, and my father had just passed away. So my son became my father in a way, which was just like mind-blowingly beautiful. And John Michael came back to me and said, Dad, I'm confused. And I finally know what you're doing. I had to surrender myself to the confusion. I had to stop trying so hard to make sense of this. And then I could get to the emotional core of what happened to Smedar and Abir, which is exactly what I kind of want for him as a reader and for everyone as a reader. I want us all to acknowledge how confusing it is, but what is not confusing and never confusing is the human heart of what is going on. What is not confusing is that we can say that we need to know each other. What is not confusing is that this stuff is enormously, enormously sad. And you talk, Shiri, about feeling the book. So that's what I want. I'm not interested in telling anybody anything. I don't know. I still don't know 1 state, 2 state, 8 states. I still don't know. I'm not here to be didactic about anything. I'm not anti-Israeli. I'm not anti-Palestinian. I'm not any of these things. I am a human being who wants to look at 2 men who have this extraordinary friendship and have this extraordinary organization of 600 families that are brought together by the art and the act of storytelling. And they believe that we believe stories are the thing that legislate the world. And if we can tell one another stories like are where the truth comes in, is texture. Now, a lot of people ask me, is this fiction or is this nonfiction? I hate to say it's actually both. It's a hybrid novel, and I don't really care if it's fiction or nonfiction. I just want it to be true, and so I tried so hard for it to be true, and I gave it to dozens of Israeli readers to look at it and to critique it. I gave it to dozens of Palestinian readers to read it and critique it. They came back to me, sometimes on the same point, saying that's correct, and the other saying that's incorrect. And I had to try and boil it all down to the elemental story, which is the story of Rami and Bassam, and how they became friends and how they now travel the world. As many people on here are familiar with the Parents Circle, but some people aren't. They travel the world, and they travel in Jerusalem and around the West Bank and around Israel, and they have the courage to go into places where sometimes they're not welcome, and they sit there and they tell the story over and over and over again, and in its repetition is part of its beauty. It's not theater. What it is human emotion laid bare in the most extraordinary way. And I'm going to read to you a little bit from the very center of the book, and then we're going to open it up to the men who actually matter, and the people and then the people who actually matter who are the people who are watching this webinar. I want to thank them for coming on board. I want them to, support the work that you guys are doing, to spread the message of what Rami and Bassam are saying. I'll be honest with you, I don't even care so much about the book. My book tour got cancelled. I'm here in the woods right now. I care still about this message, and I will care about this message for the rest of my life. I will show you that I have a book. We were on tour together. It's heartbreaking to me that we had to go off tour, but I don't know if you can see this. This is my copy of Apeirogon. I carried around. The cover's gone, but this was my reading copy, and I got Rami and Bassam to sign it for me.
Yeah, we can see that.
I will never, ever, ever, let anybody have this. But I have to tell you that Bassam, Rami wrote wrote the most beautiful thank you, and has said the most beautiful things about the book. And Bassam has said, "I have no time to hate those who hate me. I am too busy loving those who love me." And that was in New York when we got a chance to be together as friends and to travel around. And Shiri, you were there with us. It was an extraordinary experience to have oh gosh, the night when we went to the 92nd Street Y, and Rami and Bassam got a standing ovation.
Yeah.
Just extraordinary. Anyway, the book is in 1001 cantos, small little chapters, pieces. Some of them are a couple of pages long. Some of them are only a couple of words long. Two of them are actually blank. They're amicable numbers. And there's a lot about mathematics that's going on, and it is a little bit crazy, but I hope there's something for everyone in this book. The one thing I want to tell you before I read is that I tried to write a book for people who knew nothing at all about Israel and Palestine and what was going on. And at the same time to write a book for people who knew everything about Israel and Palestine and what was going on. And that for me was the juggling act, the great difficulty of doing this. Because anyone can write a specialized book. But for me, I wanted everybody to be involved. And the key to this particular passage is actually the key to the novel. I'm giving it away. I haven't really given this away to anyone. But the reader is the narrator, and you will see this, in this little passage, which will take me about 2 minutes to read. And again, then we're going to switch it over to Rami and Bassam, and then we'll all come back and we will answer some questions together. So I want to thank everybody for giving me time and space to talk about this book, to talk about these men, and to talk about this story, which will go on forever and ever and ever, we hope, because, or maybe someday there will be no need for this story, one hopes. This is section 1001. Once upon a time, and not so long ago, and not so far away, Rami Elhanan, an Israeli, a Jew, a graphic artist, husband of Nurit, father of Ilik and Guy and Yigal, father too of the late Smadar, traveled on his motorbike from the suburbs of Jerusalem to the Kremazin monastery in the mainly Christian town of Beit Jala near Bethlehem in the Judean hills to meet with Bassam Aramin, a Palestinian, a Muslim, a former prisoner, an activist, born near Hebron, husband of Salwa, father of Arab and Areen and Muhammad and Ahmed and Hiba, father too of the late Abir, 10 years old, shot dead by an unnamed Israeli border guard in East Jerusalem, almost a decade after Rami's daughter, Smadar, 2 weeks away from 14, was killed in the western part of the city by 3 Palestinian suicide bombers. Bashar Sawala, Youssef Shuli, and Tawfiq Yassin from the village of Al-Sira al-Shamia near Nablus in the West Bank, a place of intrigue to the listeners gathered in the red brick monastery perched on the hillside in the mountains of the beloved by the terraced vineyard, in the shadow of the wall, having come from as far apart as Belfast and Kyushu, Paris and North Carolina, Santiago and Brooklyn, Copenhagen and Terezin, on an ordinary day at the end of October, foggy, tinged with cold, to listen to the stories of Bassam and Rami, and to find within their stories another story, a song of songs, discovering themselves, you and me, in the stone-tiled chapel where we sit for hours, eager, hopeless, buoyed, confused, cynical, complicit, silent, our memories imploding, our synapses skipping in the gathering dark, remembering while listening all of those stories that are yet to be told.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. You know, Colum, I had the privilege of being on the road with you, being on the book tour until it was canceled. And one of the things that you said that I'll never forget is something like, the only things that are worth doing are those that'll possibly break your heart.
Yeah.
And well, you've certainly broken our hearts, or at least these stories have broken our hearts, but you've also made them grow. And these stories also make our hearts grow tremendously with every time they break when we hear them. You know, I want to give Rami and Bassam a chance to say hello too, but and share a little bit with us about their experience being characters in a novel, and yet, you know, real people, directors of an organization, fathers who lost their daughters. A lot of the work that we do is about narratives. We use the power of narratives, not only to, you know, bring these stories to people all over the world, but in all of our projects, in our women's groups, in our young ambassadors groups, in our going to high schools and speaking to Israeli kids. We do everything as parallel narratives, as shared narrative, one Israeli and one Palestinian, with doing the same thing, breaking hearts and making them grow at the same time. So Rami and Bassam, we'll take you off of mute, and give you a chance to say hello to everybody, and a chance to react to anything that Colum said. And specifically also, if you could address a few things. Rami, when we were on tour, on the book tour, you kept saying that the experience of reading the book was like hearing yourself on tape. You know, when you hear your voice and you know that it's you, but it doesn't sound exactly like you imagine your voice to be. So if you could talk about that. And Bassam, the thing that struck me that you said on tour was about the message that you left for a beer on her grave. You made her a promise on her gravestone, and how that connects to this book and to the work that both of you are doing as the co-directors of the Parent Circle.
Faddal Abu Arab.
First, this is the lifelong argument between Bassam and Rami. Who will go first? We can solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict before we can solve who will go first.
Rami asked me that he wants to talk, so please.
I think maybe we should let Rami talk first. Bassam, you're going to have to go somewhere where you have better reception, because we can't hear you so good, so well.
He wants to talk first, so I agree. I want to give him the opportunity to talk now.
Okay, and you go somewhere where you have better internet reception, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Rami, you won.
Okay, he always win, and this is a 15 years old discussion, and I always lose, and I'm happy to lose. This is really peculiar. If someone would have come to me 25 years ago, telling me that one day I will be standing in front of my iMac, very advanced iMac, looking at Shiri and 500 people listening to me, that talking about peace and reconciliation and compassion and the ability to move after a tragedy, I would have killed him. My life was turned upside down. My life was turned upside down the minute I lost my daughter. My life was turned upside down the minute I met Itzhak Frankenthal, who drafted me into this crazy organization, the Parent Circle, and actually gave me a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And my life was turned upside down when Bassam Aramin and his wife Salwa and his family came to my house in 2005 on the birth of Combatants for Peace movement, which my son Elik was one of the founders. And while my life was turned upside down when Abi was killed. And I was driving with Nurit, my wife, to the Hadassah hospital, and my life turned upside down. And my life turned upside down once more when I met Colum McCann. Colum McCann did what everyone did. I mean, they listened to our stories, they cried a little bit, and they move on. But Colum McCann did not move on. Colum McCann stayed and became a friend and became a brother and became a figure which is so central in our life. And his rare ability to tell our stories in a way that we could never ever do it, spread it to so many people, portrayed in a way that breaks people's hearts and make them understand what we are doing, is something that I will be forever grateful. The book is a masterpiece. I read it on the way to New York on the plane. I couldn't take it off my head. I skipped all the personal parts because it really felt like I was listening to myself recorded, and it was very peculiar. But the story itself as a story, the layers of the story, the way it throws you back and forth from one reality to another reality was so fascinating that I just couldn't take it off my head.
Thank you.
Bassam?
I just want to welcome everyone and wish all of you that you are safe and healthy, you and your families. It's very difficult to talk after Rami. I agree with him. For the message that the promise that I promised Abir when I wrote on her grave, that your killer will die and you will live longer than him. No one will know his name, no one will ask about his name, but I promise I'll do my best to let everyone around the world to know your story. Our message become our life. This is our daily life. Even in this very difficult time in the world, coronavirus, COVID-19, it's a proof that we are very simple human beings. We are very poor. Even those greatest countries, they are busy every day to create more weapons, nuclear weapons. They can destroy the world. Imagine Netanyahu cannot hug Sarah, his wife. It's amazing. The first time in the history of Israel, they are under curfew. And the Israelis start to say, are we in Gaza? It's because of this virus. We are all simple human beings. Our leaders must be the doctors. Imagine we don't have enough oxygen machines. We cannot save our kids, our women, our old people. And always we think how to attack the other countries, how to steal more lands. It's a proof that this is our message, always me and Rami and others. We said, let us go back to our roots, to our humanity. We need to survive together. Otherwise, we will die together. Just a few words about the book. And as Rami said, Colum, this is the difference that he dedicated to spread this message, because it's a message of a humanity. It's not only for Palestine and Israel, it's for everyone, everywhere around the world. When people meet us like we are extraordinary people, which is not. But this is the way we learn to thought, revenge, humanity, and forgiveness, and good relationship, to love each other, to respect each other. It's a strange messages, which is not. We want to prove that this is the normal message that we need to live with, that we need to spread, and this is how we need to behave as human beings. I didn't read the book until now, as I promised Colum. I will try to read it. It's very difficult for me. It's very difficult to think how some genius man described this ongoing pain. In Arabic, we call it hasra. Hasra, it's more than pain. It's still forever. You will never heal. And you need to know how to deal with it, how to live with it. He described it in a very, very painful way that I couldn't continue to read the book. But it gives the message a very good stage to spread this message around the world with millions of people, to touch millions of people. For that, we are very grateful for Colum as a writer, as a friend, and as a brother.
Well,
Thank you.
I want to thank you for that extraordinary, for both of you, and to see the moon above you there, Bassam. I think somebody in the comments said that the moon above you is the same moon above Rami, above actually all of us right now. And one of the things that we have to do, and what we have to talk about, is the purpose of stories and storytelling. I knew from the beginning that I wanted to disrupt things and to tell it differently, and throw people off their balance, and not to do some sort of like equivocation or there's also there's talk, online often about normalization and these sort of things. But for me, the purpose of art is to throw people off balance so that they go away with their own questions. And then they reconstitute the world with their own questions. So what you guys did to me by telling that story was you gave me this incredibly privileged view into the grief of the human heart. And it seems to me that good literature should be about confronting the heartbreak of the world, but also disrupting people, saying, it's not easy. None of this is easy. We're not going to sit back in our little rooms, close the curtains, and put a sort of GPS on how we should think. We have to think differently. And one of the things that strikes me about whenever I listen to you is that you make me feel and think differently. So I thank you for that.
Thank you guys all. There's so many comments and questions coming in. It's overwhelming. We will have another webinar on April 16th. Again, with Rami and Bassam, having more time to talk, and Colum also here to answer questions. So let's just take a couple of questions in the time that we have left. I'm trying to filter through them. Colum, there are a couple of questions coming in about Ireland, and this one specifically from Jean. Hi, Jean. She writes, Colum, you experienced the troubles in Ireland, and I'm wondering if, and if so, how you were influenced by that in exploring this conflict through Bassam and Rami's stories. So there are a number of questions asking about Ireland, your experience with Ireland, and how it impacted Apeirogon.
Enormously. It impacted it enormously. I grew up, my mum is from Derry, my father's from Dublin. most summers when I was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, up until I was a teenager, my mother would bring me up to Northern Ireland. We would get stopped on the border, and there would be a green post box on one border, and there would be a red post box on the other border. And I could never quite understand, why are these post boxes different colors? Why are the soldiers coming on the bus? Why are they taking us off? Why does my mum tell me that to be careful of my Dublin accent when we're in certain parts of Derry? We went up to her family farm, and I loved it there. I absolutely loved it there. But I remember things happening like the Miami Show Band massacre in the early 1970s, when these musicians were killed, and thinking, but what is going on there? And I've spent a lot of my time confronting stuff about Northern Ireland. I wrote a little book called Everything in This Country Must, which is about Northern Ireland, but also Transatlantic, which is about the Irish peace process. And I think it gave me an insight into Rami and Bassam, and then what they were talking about when they talked about peace. And I know that they have been to Ireland and Northern Ireland, and they have spoken over there, right, Rami?
We just couldn't tell who's the Catholic and who's the Protestant. Like, you cannot tell who is the Palestinian, who is the Israeli.
Can I just tell you, there's a really bad joke. It's like because they used to they'd line people up and say, are you Catholic or are you Protestant? And the answer would be the joke answer would be, I'm not Catholic, I'm not Protestant, I'm Jewish, right? And then the answer would be, oh, hi, but are you a Catholic Jew or a Protestant Jew?
You know what Bassam would have said the minute. Bassam, what would you say?
No, please say.
No one is perfect.
But yeah, in relation to Northern Ireland, it was enormously important for me. Bassam, you went to Northern Ireland?
Yes, maybe 2, 3 times. It's also painful, but at least you have peace agreement. In spite, there is 50 walls for peace still. 50 walls, but at least to have ceasefire or peace agreement, you need to be you need to have a reconciliation process. Otherwise, it will be very easy to revive the conflict again. So I noticed there are a lot of graves full of very beautiful flowers on them, but unfortunately, no one can smell it. No one can see it on the graves. So this is one of our activities 2 years ago in the International Women's Day, that the Palestinians and the Israeli mothers in Tel Aviv, in the Women's Day, they give flowers to the audience, to the people in Tel Aviv, and to say, I'll give you a flower rather than to put it in a grave. We are very similar. Conflicts are always very similar. Maybe not the same reasons. And the solution, it's very similar solution. We need to start to talk, to know each other. Otherwise, it's very easy to justify the enemy. And the enemy have no human face. It's very easy to attack the enemy because he's a monster. When you start to talk to your enemy and you discover his nobility and his humanity, he is not your enemy anymore. He become your friend or brother or partner at least.
Bassam, that really touches on the next question. There's so many questions that came in. We could have just a whole webinar for just answering questions. But Rob is asking, to make peace, does one have to want peace for the other as much as one wants peace for oneself?
It's absolutely, you cannot make peace with yourself and for yourself, detach yourself from the others. You cannot. No one can live in peace and democracy and freedom alone while others are suffering, We are very connected. Peace starts from here, to wish the best for others exactly as you wish the best for yourself. To respect Rami Elhanan as you respect yourself. This is a value. It's a very basic human value. You cannot see people from up down and you imagine or expect that everything will go as normal. So yes, absolutely, I agree. You need to wish the others, to work even the others will have the same conditions, the same peace that you wish to live in. Then we will have peace. I believe the people or the earth before Corona is not the same after Corona. We need to start to judge our politicians, our corrupted politicians, those thieves. Their goal is just to create more death in the world, more weapons, to sell more weapons, to start to industry of medical treatments, oxygen machines instead of nuclear weapons.
Mm. Colum, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an extraordinarily beautiful question. You know, do you want peace for the other as much as you want peace for yourself? I think it maybe begins in wanting peace for yourself, but then you have to suddenly, very quickly recognize that in order to have peace for yourself, you must have peace for the other. I think the women in Northern Ireland, the Women's Coalition in Northern Ireland realized that very early on. And there are lots of powerful players in the idea for peace. There are women in Israel, there are women in Palestine who are doing things. And I think that something is going to come from underneath, whether it be a Greta Thunberg who's 15 years old, or a Greta who's 75 years old, or a Greta who's 95 years old, and maybe 100,000 Gretas who, instead of, just exactly like Bassam says, instead of it being top down, it's going to bubble up somehow from underneath. And peace comes in the most extraordinary ways. And one of the things I want to let Rami talk, where Rami talks about putting a crack in the wall, you know, and Leonard Cohen has this extraordinary song where, you know, he says, if there is a crack in the wall, the purpose of it is to let the light through. But when you put another crack in the wall, you actually put another one and another one, and another one. And eventually, guess what? It's inevitable that something will fall. And my great hope is that these two men, your organization, other organizations that are there, will recognize that peace comes from the bottom up. And one day, we don't know when it's going to happen. We didn't know in Ireland, 800 years of history. And then suddenly now we have 20 years of peace. Extraordinary. It can happen.
Mm-hmm. Colum, there are a lot of questions coming in. Oh, sorry, Rami, did you want to say anything about that?
No, I'm overwhelmed by the wisdom of my friends.
Oh, good. There are a number of questions, Colum, coming in for you about how the book came together for you. So this one sort of summarizes a number of the questions. How did the pieces of the book come together for you? How did you sort the fragments, the pieces, the threads in order to bring them together so meaningfully? This book was unlike any other I've read. The depth and the layers make it one I will read again and again.
Wow.
This is from someone who saw us in Boston but was too nervous to ask. So
oh, wow. Hello. We had a beautiful night in Boston. What a night it was. I wish we could go back to those nights and travel again. For me, this was a weird book, and people think writers are clever, but we're not that clever. You know, we react emotionally. I feel like I was a musician. I knew the story that I wanted to tell. I wasn't sure exactly how to tell it, but then I began to feel like it was a symphony. Because the story of Rami and Bassam is symphonic. The story of Smadar and Abir is symphonic. It's both tiny and epic at the same time. And as a musician, I began to feel like a conductor, because it wasn't just one story that I was trying to tell. I was trying to tell hundreds, or not thousands actually, of stories. So I was standing up in this theater letting the music come in, and I say, okay, more piano, okay, a bit more violin, okay, reduce some of the drum bass. And then at the back of the hall, every day somebody would burst open the doors and carry a new instrument in there, and I would have to add that instrument into the music that was going on. So for me, I wanted to make a book that sounded like music in the head of the reader, and didn't tell them what to think, but allowed them to maybe question things a little differently. So my head is a bit of a wreck after writing the book. It took a long time to pull it all together. But the most important thing for me was to achieve some form of music.
That's beautiful. I wish we had more time so you could tell them the story about the violin.
Oh, the violin! But there's so much music in this book. I will at some stage tell the story of the violin. But can I also say, I spent one night down in Jericho when I sat outside exactly where Bassam is right now, and we sang Irish songs, and then we sang Arabic songs. And he sang some of the songs that got him his famous nickname, which Rami will tell us what Bassam's famous nickname is.
Bassam was the singer of the jail, and he was known by the name of Abu Arab because he used to sing songs of Abu Arab. And today, his oldest son, Arab, the partner of my son, Igal, and it goes on and on and on. Now our grandchildren will come together.
Rami, I'm going to give you your favorite question, the question that you ask when nobody else asks. This is from Laura, and she says, how can we all help to end the conflict there?
Oh, yeah, it is. I finish every meeting with this message, which I think the essence of our activity and our message. And it says simply don't stand aside. My father was a Holocaust survivor. He was an Auschwitz graduate. And 75 years ago, they took my grandparents to the ovens back in Europe, the free and civilized worlds to the side, never lifting one finger. And today, while our two nations are massacring each other without any mercy, and a genocide is taking place in Syria, and Americans help Turks to kill Kurds in Iraq, and atrocities wherever you look, the free and civilized world is still standing aside, doing nothing, which is a crime. Because standing aside while a crime is being committed is also a crime. And we don't want you to import our conflict to your society. Everyone has really his own problems, and we don't want to add to it. But we demand of you not to stand aside. We demand of you to be pro-peace. We demand of you to be pro-justice and against this ongoing situation in which one people is dominating another. This is the essence of the problem. It can be changed. It must be changed. It will be changed. And I will finish with a message of a Jew. And I am a Jew with the utmost respect to my people, to my tradition, to my history. And I will tell everyone that ruling and oppressing and humiliating and occupying millions of people for so many years without any democratic right is not Jewish, period. No two ways about it. And being against it is not anti-Semitism. And if you have any arguments, if you get into any argument, you can quote me.
We will do.
Thank you.
Do you guys want to say some parting words to our hundreds of participants here before we have to say goodbye?
I want to say to them, because we love them, stay at home in order to be safe. And I will quote Darwish when he says, "Don't scare, you survive." So we will survive.
Inshallah.
Thank you.
And I would like to say thank you. It's so great to see my brothers there under the same moon. I want to say thank you to all the people who came on here. I want to say that I will also be doing one tomorrow on Facebook on my Facebook page. Rami and Bassam won't be on that one, but if anybody wanted to, I will try and answer some more of the questions that came in today. And we will be doing this again, as you know, Sherry, on the 16th, I believe. Is that correct? Rami and Bassam will be talking, and then I will be contributing. I feel like that's the whole situation. Rami and Bassam have talked, and they have sent this message to the world. I came in, and it somehow hit a tuning fork in my chest. And somehow then I was able to write this book, and that's all it was. I became a sort of conduit for what it is that they're saying. They are incredibly important, and what they're doing in the world and what they're saying in the world is incredibly important. And I hope people can get a chance to listen to what it is that they say. And I'm deeply grateful for the chance to have told their story.
Thank you all, and thank you all for coming. And so many of the questions that we got today were about Rami and Bassam and your stories and your daughters. And I purposefully asked more of the column-focused questions. So next time on April 16th, we'll be able to focus more on Rami and Bassam and your stories and your daughters. And people asked about your wives. And so there's a lot more to talk about, a lot more to learn. We will be sending out a recording. If you're not signed up to receive our newsletter, we will send you an email so you can sign up, and then you can get the recording. Follow us on Facebook, follow us on social media, learn more about the work of the Parent Circle. Rami and Bassam are the co-directors, but there are 600 other bereaved Israeli and Palestinian families. There's a 12-person staff, Israelis and Palestinians, that have been meeting by Zoom every week to figure out how to continue spreading the message during the coronavirus. We have 2 offices sitting empty right now, but one in Beit Jala and one in the Tel Aviv area. And everything we do is in this way, where you see one Israeli and one Palestinian standing next to each other, sharing their stories to inspire hope. And we need a lot of hope these days. Rami, did you want to have the last word?
Oh, yeah. I want to thank you, Shiri. I want to thank the American Friends of the Parent Circle, which are dear friends and partners. And we couldn't be where we are without them, without their support, without their love, without their partnership, and especially to you. Thank you, my dear.
Thank you. And to Christopher behind the scenes. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and see you on April 16th.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.